Welcome back. Village life may seem quiet, but murder always finds its way in. In the drowsy hush of St. Elm's, where the church spire pierced the twilight and roses whispered secrets to the wind, a stranger's shadow fell across the vicarage gate. Miss Jane Marple, knitting by her cottage window, caught the flicker of a lantern in the night, a harbinger of trouble, she thought, her needles pausing. For in a village where every glance held a story and every letter a hidden barb, the knock that echoed at midnight was no mere courtesy call. It was the first note in a symphony of deceit, where innocence masked betrayal, and the past, long buried, rose like a spectre to claim its due. Chapter 1. The Quiet Village of St. Elms, the village of St. Elms lay like a forgotten jewel in the verdant embrace of the English countryside, where the hills rolled gently under a sky that seemed perpetually caught between the soft haze of dawn and the golden hush of dusk. It was one of those places where time moved not in the hurried ticks of city clocks, but in the slow, measured rhythm of seasons turning, fields of wheat swaying in summer breezes, orchards heavy with autumn fruit, and winters blanketed in a silence broken only by the occasional crackle of frost underfoot. The houses clustered around the ancient stone church with its weathered spire piercing the heavens were mostly thatched cottages with gardens bursting forth in a riot of hollyhocks and roses, their petals unfurling like secrets whispered to the wind. Narrow lanes wound between them, bordered by hedgerows, alive with the chatter of birds and the occasional scamper of a rabbit darting into the underbrush. At the heart of this idyllic tableau stood the vicarage, a rambling Georgian edifice of warm red brick, its windows framed by climbing ivy that clung tenaciously to the walls as if guarding the stories within. It was home to Reverend Thomas Hale, a man of middle years whose sermons were delivered with a quiet fervor that inspired more reflection than fire. His wife, Eliza, was a woman of refined elegance, her dark hair often pinned in a neat chignon, though lately those who paid attention, and there were always those who did in St. Elms had noticed a certain pallor to her cheeks, a flicker of unease in her eyes as she went about her parish duties. Accompanying them was the young curate, Mr. Geoffrey Lang, a earnest fellow fresh from theological college, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a habit of quoting scripture at the most unexpected moments. On the outskirts of the village, perched on a slight rise that afforded a panoramic view of the comings and goings below, sat the modest cottage of Miss Jane Marple. It was a quaint dwelling, its whitewashed walls adorned with window boxes overflowing with geraniums, and a thatched roof that sloped gently like the brim of an old hat. Miss Marple herself was a figure of deceptive fragility, an elderly spinster with silver hair coiled into a bun, spectacles perched on the end of her nose, and a pair of knitting needles that seemed an extension of her slender fingers. She was not one for grand adventures or dramatic pursuits. Her days were spent in the quiet pursuits of gardening, reading, and, most notably, observing. From her sitting-room window, armed with a cup of Earl Grey and her ever-present knitting, she watched the world of St. Elms unfold like the pages of a well-thumbed novel. "People are the same everywhere," she would often murmur to herself, her voice soft and thoughtful, as if sharing a confidence with the empty room. It was a philosophy born of long experience, for Miss Marple had seen much in her years, though she rarely spoke of it. Her travels had been few, but her insights into human nature were vast, drawn from the microcosm of village life where pettiness, kindness, ambition, and deceit played out in miniature, yet with all the intensity of a Shakespearean drama. She had a way of noticing the small things, the hesitation in a step, the avoidance of a gaze, the subtle shift in tone during a casual conversation that others dismissed as inconsequential. To Miss Marple, these were the threads that, when pulled, could unravel the most tightly woven tapestry of lies. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of her cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. Miss Marple sat in her favorite armchair, a faded chintz affair stuffed with horsehair, her knitting needles clicking in a steady cadence as she worked on an intricate pattern for a baby's blanket, intended for the newborn of the local baker's daughter. The wool was a soft blue, the color of a clear sky, and as her fingers moved with practiced ease, her mind wandered over the events of the previous day. There had been a minor stir at the post office, where old Mr. Jenkins, the postmaster, had grumbled about an influx of letters from afar, one in particular addressed to the vicar in a bold, unfamiliar hand. But such thoughts were interrupted by the distant chime of the church bell, tolling the hour with a resonance that echoed across the fields. It was 9 o'clock, and the village was stirring to life. From her vantage point, Miss Marple could see the milkman making his rounds, his cart creaking under the weight of glass bottles clinking together like merry bells. Children scampered toward the schoolhouse, their laughter carrying on the breeze, while farmers in sturdy boots trudged toward the meadows, tools slung over shoulders. It was a scene of pastoral tranquility, yet Miss Marple knew better than most that beneath such serenity often lurked currents of unrest, hidden like roots beneath the soil. As the morning progressed, Miss Marple decided to venture into the village proper. She donned her sensible tweed coat, a garment that had seen better days, but served her well against the chill, and selected a sturdy walking stick from the stand by the door. The path from her cottage wound down the hill, bordered by wildflowers, daisies nodding their heads, buttercups gleaming like tiny suns. She walked at a leisurely pace, pausing now and then to admire a particularly fine bloom, or to exchange pleasantries with passers-by. First came young Tommy Briggs, the errand boy, cycling past with a basket of groceries. "Mornin', Miss Marple," he called, tipping his cap with a grin. "Fine day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is, Tommy," she replied, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Mind you don't pedal too fast on that hill. We wouldn't want another spill like last month." Tommy laughed and waved, pedaling on, but Miss Marple noted the slight bulge in his jacket pocket. A letter, perhaps, or something more intriguing. Boys his age were always up to mischief, though harmless for the most part. Further along, she encountered Mrs. Eleanor Croft, no relation to the ill-fated visitor who would soon disrupt the peace, though the name would later strike her as curiously coincidental. Mrs. Croft was tending her front garden, clipping roses with a pair of shears that glinted in the sunlight. She was a robust woman in her 50s, with cheeks flushed from exertion and a no-nonsense air about her. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, straightening up and wiping her brow. Out for your constitutional, I see. The air does wonders for the constitution, doesn't it? It certainly does, Mrs. Croft, Miss Marple agreed, leaning on her stick. Your roses are looking splendid this year. That deep crimson one. It's the variety from the old manor house, isn't it? I remember when Lady Beaumont used to grow them. They chatted amiably about gardening tips, the best fertilizers, and the pesky aphids that plagued the blooms. But as the conversation turned to village news, Mrs. Croft's tone grew conspiratorial. Have you heard about the new family moving into Willow Cottage? The Harringtons, they call themselves. From the city, mind you. I wonder what brings them to a quiet place like St. Elms. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Change of pace, perhaps. Cities can be so exhausting, but I'm sure they'll settle in nicely. She made a mental note of the Harringtons. Newcomers often brought with them a whiff of the outside world, stirring the pot in unexpected ways. Bidding Mrs. Croft farewell, she continued on, her mind already weaving connections between the mundane and the potential for intrigue. The village green came into view, an expanse of manicured grass encircled by ancient oaks whose branches formed a natural canopy. At its center stood the War Memorial, a solemn stone cross etched with the names of local lads lost in the Great War. Benches dotted the perimeter, and on one sat Colonel Arthur Bantry, retired from the Indian Army, puffing on his pipe while perusing the morning paper. He was a bluff, hearty man, with a mustache that bristled like a hedgehog, and a fondness for recounting tales of his campaigns. Spotting Miss Marple, he folded his paper and rose to greet her. "Ah, Miss Marple, just the person. Care to join me for a moment? I've been pondering this crossword. Devilish thing, 8 across. Mysterious visitor, 7 letters." Miss Marple settled onto the bench, adjusting her skirts. "Let me think. Enigma, perhaps. No, that's 6. Phantom, that's 7. The colonel chuckled. "Phantom it is." "You're a wonder, Miss Marple. Sharp as a tack." Their conversation meandered from puzzles to politics, with the colonel lamenting the state of the world. "All this unrest abroad makes one glad to be in a place like St. Elms, eh? Safe as houses." Miss Marple nodded, but her thoughts drifted to the fragility of such safety. She had seen enough to know that danger could lurk in the most unlikely corners. As they spoke, a figure approached from the direction of the church. Reverend Hale himself, striding purposefully across the green. He was dressed in his clerical garb, the black cassock fluttering slightly in the breeze, a sheaf of papers tucked under his arm. Sermon notes, no doubt. His face, usually composed in benevolent lines, bore a trace of preoccupation, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with an inner dilemma. "Good morning, Colonel, Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm but tinged with distraction. "A beautiful day the Lord has given us." "Indeed, Reverend," the colonel replied, tapping out his pipe. "Though I hear you've had a spot of bother with the organ. Mrs. Jenkins tells me it's wheezing like an old asthmatic." The Reverend smiled thinly. "A minor issue. Mr. Lang is seeing to it. Youthful energy is a blessing in such matters." Miss Marple observed the exchange closely, noting the way Hale's eyes darted briefly toward the post office across the way. "And how is Mrs. Hale?" she inquired gently. "I haven't seen her at the Women's Institute meetings lately." Reverend Hale hesitated for the briefest moment, a pause so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. "Eliza is well, thank you. A touch of fatigue, nothing more. The parish duties can be demanding. He excused himself shortly after, heading toward the vicarage, but Miss Marple filed away the hesitation, along with the rumor she'd heard from the baker about a letter that had arrived the day before, postmarked from London, causing the Reverend to retreat to his study for hours. The colonel, oblivious to such subtleties, resumed his newspaper. "Fine chap, the Reverend, steady as they come." Miss Marple murmured agreement, but her mind was elsewhere. She rose to continue her walk, bidding the colonel goodbye, and made her way toward the post office. It was a small, cramped building with a counter cluttered by stamps, parcels, and the ever-present scent of ink and paper. Behind it stood Mr. Jenkins, a wiry man with spectacles sliding down his nose, sorting mail with the precision of a surgeon. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins," Miss Marple said, stepping inside. The bell above the door tinkled cheerfully. "I wonder if you have any stamps for postcards, the scenic ones, if you please." As he fetched them, she casually remarked, "Busy morning? I saw the Reverend earlier. He seemed a bit out of sorts. Perhaps the mail brought unwelcome news?" Mr. Jenkins peered over his glasses, his voice dropping to a whisper, though they were alone. "Well, Miss Marple, since you ask, there was a letter for him yesterday, thick envelope, from London. He collected it himself, and I swear his hand trembled as he signed for it. Not like him at all." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Letters from the city often carry weight." "Family matters, perhaps?" Jenkins shrugged. "Couldn't say, but he looked as if he'd seen a ghost." Purchasing her stamps, Miss Marple stepped back into the sunlight, her thoughts turning like the wheels of a mill. The village was full of such small mysteries, unexplained letters, fleeting expressions, unspoken tensions, that rarely amounted to much, but occasionally they coalesced into something more sinister. She recalled a similar incident in her youth in the village of St. Mary Mead, where an innocuous note had unraveled a web of deceit involving a long-lost relative and a contested will. History has a way of repeating itself, she thought, though the players change. Her path led her past the schoolhouse, where the children's voices rose in a chorus of recitation, and then to the bakery, where the aroma of fresh bread wafted enticingly. Inside, Mrs. Baker, a plump woman with flour-dusted apron, was arranging loaves on the shelves. "Miss Marple, just in time. The scones are fresh from the oven. Care for one?" Accepting gratefully, Miss Marple engaged in light conversation, steering it toward the vicarage. "I hear Mrs. Hale has been under the weather. Nothing serious, I hope?" Mrs. Baker leaned in, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of gossip. "Oh, it's more than that, if you ask me. My husband delivered milk there this morning, and he says she was pacing the drawing room like a caged animal. And the curate, Mr. Lang, he's been hovering about more than usual, protective-like." Miss Marple sipped tea from a proffered cup, absorbing the details. "Young Mr. Lang is devoted to his duties. Perhaps it's just the strain of parish life." But inwardly, she wondered at Eliza's nervousness, glances over the shoulder as she'd observed herself during a recent church service, where the vicar's wife had started at the creak of a door. Leaving the bakery with a parcel of scones, Miss Marple strolled toward the church, its ancient stones glowing in the midday light. The graveyard adjoined it, headstones tilted at odd angles, inscribed with names of generations past. She paused by one, that of old Vicar Simmons, who had served before Hale, a man known for his stern sermons and hidden kindnesses. "Rest in peace," she murmured, reflecting on how even the clergy had their secrets. Inside the church, the air was cool and scented with beeswax from the candles. Mr. Lang was indeed at the organ, tinkering with the keys, a frown of concentration on his face. He looked up as she entered, his expression lightening. "Miss Marple, come to admire the stained glass? The light is particularly fine today." They discussed the windows, depictions of saints and miracles, their colors vivid as jewels. But Miss Marple gently probed. "You seem busy, Mr. Lang. The Reverend mentioned your help with the organ. And Mrs. Hale, is she assisting with the flower arrangements this week?" Lang's cheeks colored slightly. "She's resting. I've taken over some tasks. The vicarage has been a bit tense lately." He hesitated, then added, "A letter arrived. Something from the past, I gather." The Reverend confided a little. Miss Marple's interest piqued, but she pressed no further, knowing that patience often yielded more than insistence. "The past has long shadows," she said softly, "but light always finds a way." As afternoon waned, Miss Marple returned home, her mind awhirl with fragments of conversation and observation. She prepared a simple lunch, cold ham, salad from her garden, and a slice of cheese, eating it at the kitchen table while gazing out at the village below. The vicarage loomed in the distance, its chimneys puffing smoke lazily into the sky. What secrets did it hold? The letter from London, Eliza's anxiety, Lang's protectiveness, all pieces of a puzzle that might mean nothing or everything. The evening brought a visitor, Mrs. Price, the quintessential village gossip, a woman of indeterminate age with a sharp nose and an even sharper tongue. She arrived as Miss Marple was settling in with her knitting, the needles resuming their rhythmic click. "Miss Marple, I simply had to come," Mrs. Price announced, bustling in with a basket of apples. "Have you heard? The vicar received a strange letter today, postmarked from London, they say. He looked quite pale after reading it. I saw him from my window. He crumpled it up and stared into space for ages." Miss Marple offered tea, pouring from a china pot into delicate cups. "Letters can be such harbingers, Mrs. Price, but let's not jump to conclusions. It could be parish business, a donation perhaps, or news from an old friend." Mrs. Price leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Oh, but it's more than that. My niece works at the post office, you know, and she says the handwriting was bold, almost aggressive. And Eliza, poor thing, she's been jumpy as a cat on hot bricks. I ran into her at the grocer's, and she dropped her basket when someone slammed a door." They sipped tea, the conversation flowing like a river, touching on various village matters, the Harringtons' arrival with their fancy motor car and city manners, the Colonel's latest fishing expedition, yielding nothing but tall tales, the schoolmaster's quarrel with a parent over curriculum. But always it circled back to the vicarage. "Mark my words," Mrs. Price said, "there's trouble brewing." That letter, it stirred up something old, something buried. Miss Marple listened attentively, interjecting with mild questions that encouraged more details. "Did your niece notice the return address?" "No, but it was sealed with wax, fancy, like." "And the Reverend's reaction? Did he mention anything?" "Not a word, but he shut himself in his study all afternoon." As the clock chimed 7, Mrs. Price departed, leaving Miss Marple to her thoughts. Alone once more, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the blue wool looping into intricate patterns. The village outside her window grew dim as twilight descended, lights flickering on in cottages like stars emerging in the sky. She pondered the day's gleanings, the letter, the pallor, the nervousness. It reminded her of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a similar missive had heralded a chain of events leading to murder. But that was different, she told herself. Or was it? The night deepened, and Miss Marple retired to bed, but sleep was elusive. She lay awake, listening to the hoot of an owl and the distant bark of a fox. Her mind, ever active, sifted through the human frailty she'd observed, the ambition in Lang's eyes, the fear in Eliza's, the distraction in Hale's. People are the same everywhere, she whispered into the darkness. Little did she know that the midnight knock, soon to come, would transform these whispers into a symphony of suspense. Yet for now, Saint. Elms slumbered peacefully, its secrets tucked away like letters in a drawer, waiting for the light of revelation. The vicarage stood silent, its inhabitants unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct, sensed the shift in the air, like the calm before thunder. And so the stage was set in this quiet village where the ordinary masked the extraordinary, and the past, like an uninvited guest, was about to make its presence known. As the hours ticked toward midnight, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves outside Miss Marple's window. She rose, unable to shake a vague unease, and peered out. The vicarage lights were still on, a solitary glow in the darkness. "Something is afoot," she murmured. But what, she could not yet say. The chapter of that day closed, but the book of mystery was just beginning to open. Chapter 2. The knock at midnight. The clock in the vicarage hall struck 12, its chimes reverberating through the silent house with a solemnity that seemed to underscore the lateness of the hour. The wind outside had grown fiercer, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the old Georgian structure, despite the embers glowing faintly in the drawing-room hearth. Reverend Thomas Hale, roused from a restless sleep, lay still for a moment, listening to the storm's low moan. Beside him, Eliza stirred, her breath uneven, as if caught in the remnants of a troubling dream. The knock came again, sharp, insistent, cutting through the night like a summons from another world. "Who could it be at this hour?" Thomas whispered, his voice thick with sleep and unease. He rose, pulling on his dressing gown, its heavy folds dragging against the polished floorboards. Eliza sat up, clutching her robe to her chest, her eyes wide in the dim glow of the bedside candle. "Thomas, don't go down alone." "It's not safe." Her voice trembled, a note of fear that struck him as unusual. She was not one to startle easily, despite her recent agitation. "Nonsense, my dear," he replied, forcing a calm he did not entirely feel. "It's likely some poor soul caught in the storm, seeking shelter." I'll see to it he lit a second candle, its flame flickering as he descended the creaking staircase, leaving Eliza perched on the edge of the bed, her fingers twisting the hem of her nightgown. The vicarage hall was cold, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish. The knock came again, more urgent now, and Thomas hesitated at the door, his hand resting on the heavy iron latch. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Reverend Hale?" The voice from beyond the door was hoarse, strained, as if its owner had been shouting against the wind. "I must speak with you urgently. It's about the past. The incident in London 20 years ago. The words hung in the air, sharp and weighted, like a stone dropped into still water. Thomas's breath caught. His fingers tightened on the latch, and for a moment he considered turning back, pretending he hadn't heard. But duty and curiosity compelled him. He opened the door, revealing a man standing on the threshold, his form half hidden by the shadows of the storm. He wore a rain-soaked coat, its collar turned up against the wind, and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. Water dripped from him, pooling on the stone step, and his posture suggested exhaustion, or perhaps desperation. "Reverend Hale?" the man repeated, stepping forward so the candlelight caught the edge of his features, gaunt, unshaven, with eyes that glinted with an intensity that made Thomas's pulse quicken. "I'm Harold Croft. We need to talk." Now Eliza's voice came from the top of the stairs, sharp with alarm. "Thomas, who is this man?" She had followed him. Down, her bare feet silent on the carpet, her candle casting trembling shadows on the walls. Thomas turned, his face pale but composed. "Wait here, my dear. This won't take long." He gestured for Croft to enter, leading him toward the study at the end of the hall. As the door closed behind them, Croft's voice dropped to a low murmur, barely audible to Eliza, who lingered just outside. "You thought it was buried, Reverend, but secrets have a way of resurfacing." The study was a small, book-lined room, its shelves groaning under the weight of theological tomes and parish records. A single lamp burned on the desk, casting a warm but insufficient glow. Thomas set his candle down, its flame wavering as he faced his visitor. "What do you want, Croft?" he asked, his tone clipped. "It's been 20 years. "Why now?" Croft removed his hat, revealing a face etched with lines of hardship, his hair thinning and streaked with gray. "Because the truth doesn't die, Hale. You know what happened in London, the theft, the lies, the lives ruined. I've carried it all these years, and I'm done running." He leaned closer, his voice a harsh whisper. "I need your help, or else others will hear of it." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You're threatening me?" "After all this time, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. The matter was settled." "Settled?" Croft's laugh was bitter, almost a cough. "For you, perhaps, but not for me, not for her." He reached into his coat, pulling out a crumpled envelope, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. "This is proof. Names, dates, transactions, enough to stir up trouble for you and your wife." The mention of Eliza made Thomas stiffen. "Leave her out of this. She had nothing to do with it," but his voice faltered, betraying a flicker of doubt. Croft's eyes narrowed, sensing weakness. "Oh, she's in it, Hale. Deeper than you think? Shall we discuss it, or do I take this to the papers?" Outside the wind howled, rattling the study windows, but within the silence was oppressive. Thomas sank into his chair, his hands clasped tightly. "What do you want? Money? Absolution? I can't undo the past." Croft leaned against the desk, his expression unreadable. "I want justice. And I want you to admit what you did. Tonight. Or this," he tapped the envelope, "goes public." Their voices rose, a heated exchange muffled by the heavy oak door, but Eliza caught fragments as she pressed her ear closer, her heart pounding. "Betrayal, promises broken, a woman's ruin." She backed away, her candle trembling in her grip, and retreated to the drawing-room, where she sank onto a sofa, her mind racing. The past, that long-buried spectre, had come knocking, and she feared what it might demand. Across the village, in her cottage on the hill, Miss Jane Marple was also awake. Insomnia, an occasional companion in her later years, had driven her from her bed to the sitting room, where she stood by the window, a shawl draped over her shoulders. The storm had roused her, its gusts shaking the geraniums in their boxes. From her vantage point, she could see the vicarage, its silhouette stark against the roiling clouds. A flicker of light caught her eye, a candle perhaps, moving in one of the lower rooms. "Curious," she murmured, her sharp eyes narrowing. "The vicarage should be dark at this hour." She considered lighting a lamp, but decided against it, preferring the clarity of darkness to sharpen her thoughts. The village was no stranger to late-night disturbances, farmers tending to sick livestock, young lovers stealing moments under the stars. But a visitor to the vicarage at midnight was unusual. She recalled Mrs. Price's gossip about the London letter, the Reverend's pallor, Eliza's unease. A coincidence, she mused, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her shawl. Or the first thread in a larger pattern? Back at the vicarage, the confrontation in the study reached a crescendo. "You can't do this," Thomas said, his voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. "I've built a life here, a good one. You'll destroy everything." Croft's smile was cold. "You destroyed plenty yourself, Hale. I'm just balancing the scales." He tucked the envelope back into his coat. "I'll give you one day to think it over. Meet me tomorrow night, here, same time. Bring what I ask, or the village will know who you really are." He turned, pulling his hat low, and strode out of the study, leaving Thomas slumped at his desk, the candle flame guttering as if mirroring his faltering resolve. Eliza, hearing the study door open, darted back to the staircase, pretending to descend as Croft emerged. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, and brushed past without a word. The front door slammed behind him, swallowed by the storm's roar. Thomas appeared moments later, his face ashen. "Go back to bed, Eliza," he said, his voice hollow. "It's nothing to worry about." But Eliza's eyes were sharp, catching the tremor in his hands. "Who was he, Thomas? What did he want?" she pressed, stepping closer. He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "An old acquaintance, fallen on hard times. I've dealt with it. Please, let's not speak of it now." He moved past her, climbing the stairs with a heaviness that belied his words. Eliza lingered in the hall, her mind a whirl of suspicion and dread. The name Harold Croft was unfamiliar, yet the mention of London and the incident stirred memories she had long tried to suppress. A scandal from their early marriage, whispers of theft and disgrace that had nearly cost Thomas his calling. She shivered, not from the cold, and extinguished her candle, plunging the hall into darkness. Outside, Croft vanished into the storm, his figure swallowed by the night as he trudged toward the inn where he had taken a room. The wind tore at his coat, but he moved with purpose, clutching the envelope tightly. He did not notice the shadow that followed at a distance, silent and unseen, nor did he sense the eyes watching from a cottage window high on the hill. Miss Marple, still at her post, saw the vicarage door open and close, a brief silhouette against the candlelight before the darkness reclaimed it. She remained there a moment longer, then turned away, her mind already piecing together the fragments of this midnight drama. "A visitor at such an hour," she said softly to herself, "and in such weather." This is no ordinary call. She returned to her chair, picking up her knitting, but her thoughts were far from the blue wool in her hands. The needles clicked, a steady counterpoint to the storm as she pondered the shadows cast by the past and the secrets they might yet reveal. The village slept on, oblivious to the current stirring in its heart. The vicarage lights dimmed, and the storm began to abate, leaving only the whisper of rain against the windows. But for Miss Marple, the night held a promise of unraveling truths, and she knew, with the certainty of long experience, that the knock at midnight was merely the opening note in a symphony of suspicion. Chapter 3. A Body in the Garden. The first light of dawn crept over the hills surrounding St. Elms, painting the sky in hues of pale rose and gold, as if nature itself sought to soften the harsh realities that the night had wrought. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crispness in the air, droplets glistening on leaves and petals like scattered diamonds. The village stirred slowly, the milkman's cart rumbling along the lanes, the baker's oven belching forth the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, an undercurrent of disquiet rippled through the parish, born of the midnight visitor whose presence had shattered the vicarage's tranquility. At the vicarage itself, the morning began with a semblance of routine. Reverend Thomas Hale rose early, as was his habit, though his movements were mechanical, his thoughts far from the sermon he pretended to prepare at his desk. The events of the previous night weighed heavily upon him, the hoarse demands of Harold Croft, the envelope of damning evidence, the unspoken threats that hung in the air like smoke. He glanced at the clock. It was just past 6, and the house was silent, save for the distant clatter from the kitchen where Lily, the housemaid, prepared breakfast. Eliza still slept, or feigned it, her form curled under the covers in their bedroom upstairs. Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples, and stepped out into the garden for a breath of fresh air, hoping the cool dawn might clear his mind. The vicarage garden was a haven of cultivated beauty, enclosed by high stone walls draped in wisteria and honeysuckle, their scents mingling sweetly even after the rain. Paths of crushed gravel wound between beds of roses, their blooms heavy with dew, and herbaceous borders alive with the early buzz of bees. In one corner stood a small greenhouse, its glass panes fogged from the night's humidity, and nearby an ancient oak tree spread its branches like a protective canopy. Thomas wandered along the path, his slippers dampening on the grass, his gaze distant. But as he rounded a bend near the rose bushes, prized specimens of deep crimson and soft pink, he stopped short, his heart seizing in his chest. There, sprawled face down beneath the thorny branches, lay a body. It was Harold Croft, his rain-soaked coat twisted awkwardly, his hat discarded a few feet away. One hand clutched a small glass vial, empty now, its stopper missing. Thomas knelt, his hands trembling as he touched the man's neck. No pulse, the skin cold and clammy. "Dear God," he whispered, recoiling. The scene was grotesque in its stillness, the morning light casting long shadows that seemed to accuse the very ground. He staggered back to the house, bursting into the kitchen where Lily was kneading dough. "Lily, fetch the doctor, quickly. There's a man in the garden, dead." Lily's flour-dusted hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. "Dead, sir? Who? How?" But Thomas waved her off, already, moving to rouse Eliza. "No time. Go now, and send for Inspector Graves as well." Word spread through St. Elms like wildfire in dry grass. By 8 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered at the vicarage gates, villagers in their workaday clothes, murmuring in hushed tones, craning necks for a glimpse of the macabre discovery. Mrs. Price, ever the harbinger of news, arrived breathless at Miss Marple's cottage, her bonnet askew. "Miss Marple, have you heard? A body in the vicarage garden. That midnight visitor, they say, poisoned himself right there under the roses." Miss Marple, who had been enjoying a quiet breakfast of tea and toast, set down her cup with deliberate calm. She had seen the flurry of activity from her window, the doctor's bicycle hastening along the lane, the inspector's motor car chugging up the drive. "Indeed, Mrs. Price? How dreadful! Do come in and tell me all." As Mrs. Price settled into the chintz armchair, spilling details with relish, Miss Marple listened attentively, her knitting needles paused in mid-stitch. The Reverend found him at dawn, clutching a vial, poison, mark my words, and a note in his pocket. The truth must out. Cryptic, isn't it? Inspector Graves is there now, poking about. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Poison? Such a deliberate choice. And in the garden, why not elsewhere? One wonders. She rose, smoothing her skirt. Perhaps I should pay a visit to poor Eliza. She must be distraught. Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. Oh, do let me know what you find out. The vicarage buzzed with official activity when Miss Marple arrived, her walking stick tapping lightly on the gravel drive. Inspector Graves, a sturdy man in his 40s, with a no-nonsense mustache and a notebook perpetually in hand, was directing constables in cordoning off the garden. Dr. Amelia Thorne, the village physician, a tall, angular woman with sharp features and a reputation for bluntness, emerged from the scene, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Miss Marple," she greeted, her voice clipped, "come to offer condolences? Or to observe?" "A bit of both, Doctor," Miss Marple replied mildly, her eyes scanning the garden beyond the wall. "Such a shock for the Hales." "May I see Eliza?" Dr. Thorne nodded toward the house. "She's in the drawing-room." Shaken, but holding up. As for the body, cyanide, I'd wager, from the smell and the symptoms. Fast-acting, merciful in a way. Inside, the vicarage felt oppressive, the air thick with unspoken tension. Eliza sat by the window, her hands wrung in her lap, a handkerchief twisted between her fingers. Reverend Hale paced nearby, his clerical collar askew, while Mr. Geoffrey Lang, the curate, hovered solicitously, pouring tea that went untouched. "Miss Marple," Eliza said, her voice wavering as she rose to greet her. "How kind of you to come. It's awful. That poor man." Miss Marple took her hand, squeezing gently. "My dear, what a terrible ordeal. Sit, please. Tell me what happened, if you can." Eliza sank back, her eyes darting to her husband. "Thomas found him this morning. He came last night, late. A stranger, demanding to see Thomas. They spoke in the study, then he left. We thought that was the end of it." Thomas interjected, his tone strained. "His name was Harold Croft, an old associate from my London days. He was unstable, raving about past grievances. Demanded money, I suspect blackmail. I refused, and he stormed out. Must have returned later and ended it in the garden." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, though kind. "Blackmail? How dreadful. And the note, I've heard about it." Lang spoke up, his youthful face earnest. "The inspector showed it to us." The truth must out, written on a scrap of paper tucked in his pocket. Suicide, surely. But Miss Marple, surveying the room discreetly, noted details others might overlook. Eliza's pallor, deeper than mere shock, Thomas's evasive glance toward the study door, Lang's hands fidgeting with a cufflink. "Poor man," she said softly. "But poison? One wonders where he obtained it, and why the vicarage garden, such an exposed place." Inspector Graves entered then, his boots leaving muddy tracks on the carpet. "Mrs. Hale, Reverend, a few questions, if you don't mind." He nodded to Miss Marple, whom he knew from past village incidents as a keen observer, though he dismissed her as a meddlesome spinster. "You say he left around 12:30? Did anyone see him after?" Eliza shook her head. "No, we went to bed. The storm was raging. I heard nothing unusual." Lang added, "I was in my room upstairs. Slept through it all." Graves jotted notes. "And this Croft? Any enemies? Motives for suicide?" Thomas hesitated. "He was troubled. The past, a scandal long ago. I thought it resolved." Graves pressed, "Details, Reverend?" But Thomas demurred. "Private matters. Irrelevant now." Dr. Thorne rejoined them, her examination complete. "Definitely cyanide. The vials from my surgery. Standard issue for certain treatments, though I keep it locked. Must have been stolen." Her eyes narrowed at the Hales. "You wouldn't know anything about that," Eliza gasped. "Of course not. How dare you imply?" Thorne shrugged. "Just asking. I've had a grudge against your family since that business with my brother. Embezzlement accusations you fueled, Reverend." "But I'm no poisoner," Miss Marple interposed gently. "Doctor, when did you last check your supplies?" Thorne thought. "Yesterday afternoon. All accounted for." Graves nodded. "We'll investigate the theft. Meanwhile, the body goes to the morgue for autopsy." As the morning wore on, Miss Marple excused herself to stretch her legs in the garden, with Graves' reluctant permission. The scene was cordoned, but she stood at the edge, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The body's position, arms akimbo, as if in a final struggle. The vial, glinting in the grass, footprints muddied by the rain, but one set leading from the side gate, perhaps Croft's. Return path. The rose bushes bore broken stems, thorns snagged on the coat, suggesting a fall or a push. "Interesting," she murmured. "The vial clutched so tightly, deliberate or staged?" She wandered further, noting the greenhouse door ajar, a spade leaning against it, soil fresh on its blade. Gardening at night? Unlikely. Back inside she chatted with Lily in the kitchen, the maid's hands still floured from interrupted duties. "Did you hear anything unusual last night, dear?" After the visitor left, Lily paused, her young face pale but composed. "Not much, miss. The storm was loud, but I thought I heard footsteps in the hall around one. Could have been the wind." Miss Marple smiled encouragingly. "And Mrs. Hale? Did she retire immediately?" Lily glanced toward the drawing-room. "She was up a bit. Said she was checking on the cat. It's always getting out. Looked furtive, though, like she didn't want to be seen." Eliza, entering for water, overheard and snapped, "Nonsense! I was restless, that's all. The cat is a convenient excuse." Miss Marple nodded, but filed the detail away. Cats, in her experience, were indeed frequent alibis, often masking more sinister movements. By midday, the body was removed, shrouded, and carted away, leaving the garden eerily empty, save for the trampled grass. Inspector Graves interviewed villagers at the gate, the innkeeper, who confirmed Croft's stay and his agitated state the evening before. Colonel Bantry, who claimed to have seen a shadowy figure near the churchyard around midnight, but dismissed it as a fox. "Eyes playing tricks in the dark," he boomed. Miss Marple returned home for luncheon, her mind abuzz. Over a simple meal of soup and bread, she pondered the emerging puzzle: the midnight visit, the blackmail threat, the convenient suicide. Too neat, she thought. And the poison, from the doctor's surgery. Access is key. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a staged suicide-masked murder, the vial planted to mislead. Afternoon brought more revelations. Young Tommy Briggs, the errand boy, confided to Miss Marple during her walk that he'd seen Mr. Lang arguing with a stranger, matching Croft's description, near the churchyard the previous evening. Raised voices miss, something about meddling in affairs not your own. Miss Marple thanked him with a scone from her parcel and made a note to question Lang. At the vicarage, tension simmered. Thomas confronted Eliza in private. "Did you know Croft? From London?" Eliza's eyes filled. "No, but he mentioned a woman. Was it me? The affair?" Thomas paled. "Hush. That's buried." But their whispers carried to Lang, eavesdropping in the hall, his face darkening. Dr. Thorne, back at her surgery, discovered the theft confirmed, a window forced, subtle enough to miss at first glance. "Amateur work," she told Graves. "Or meant to look so?" Graves grumbled. "Motives everywhere. Hale's past, your grudge. Lang's argument, heard about that." As evening fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting resumed, the blue wool forming a complex lace pattern. The village lights twinkled below, the vicarage a beacon of unresolved mystery. "A body in the garden," she mused. But whose hand guided the poison? The web tightens. Little did she know, the secrets were only beginning to unravel, with red herrings lurking in the shadows. The day closed with Inspector Graves departing, promising swift resolution. But in St. Elm's the air hummed with suspicion, the garden's roses drooping as if in mourning for the truths yet to bloom. Chapter 4. Suspects Emerge. The sun climbed higher in the sky over St. Elm's, casting a warm glow that belied the chill of suspicion now settling over the village like a persistent fog. The discovery of Harold Croft's body in the vicarage garden had transformed the once tranquil parish into a hive of whispered conjectures and sidelong glances. By mid-morning, the news had permeated every corner, from the post office, where Mr. Jenkins paused in his sorting to recount the tale with dramatic flair, to the bakery, where Mrs. Baker's customers lingered longer than usual, trading theories over loaves of crusty bread. The vicarage, at the epicenter of this storm, stood as a somber sentinel, its windows reflecting the curious eyes of passers-by who slowed their steps along the lane. Inspector Graves, ever the methodical soul, had established a temporary command post in the vicarage's seldom-used morning room, a space cluttered with faded chintz furniture and shelves of dusty hymnals. He sat at a small writing desk, his notebook open, pencil poised, as he interviewed the household one by one. Constables milled about outside, measuring footprints in the damp earth and photographing the scene with a cumbersome camera that clicked like a disapproving tongue. Dr. Amelia Thorne had departed after confirming her initial diagnosis, but not before casting a pointed look at Reverend Hale, her long-standing resentment simmering just beneath her professional veneer. Miss Jane Marple, having returned briefly to her cottage for a fortifying cup of tea, made her way back to the vicarage under the guise of offering further support to Eliza. She carried a basket of fresh scones wrapped in a clean tea towel, a gesture that masked her keen intent to observe the unfolding drama. As she approached the gate, she noted the cluster of villagers hovering nearby, Colonel Bantry puffing on his pipe with an air of military authority, Mrs. Price, her bonnet ribbons fluttering as she gestured animatedly, and young Tommy Briggs perched on his bicycle, eyes wide with morbid fascination. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Price called, detaching herself from the group. "They're saying it's suicide, but I don't believe it for a moment." "That man Croft, he had enemies, mark my words." Miss Marple smiled faintly, adjusting her basket. "Speculation can be dangerous, Mrs. Price. Best to let the inspector do his work." But inwardly she agreed. The staging of the body, the convenient vial, the cryptic note, all pointed to artifice rather than despair. She passed through the gate, nodding to a constable, and entered the house, where the air hung heavy with the scent of polished wood and underlying tension. In the drawing-room, Eliza Hale sat rigidly on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap as if to steady them. Reverend Thomas paced before the fireplace, his clerical collar now straightened, but his expression haggard. Mr. Geoffrey Lang stood by the window, gazing out at the garden with a furrowed brow, his youthful energy subdued by the morning's events. "Miss Marple, thank goodness," Eliza said, rising to greet her. "This is unbearable. The inspector questions us as if we're criminals." Miss Marple set down her basket, accepting a seat offered by Lang. "It's procedure, my dear. In such cases, everyone is a suspect until proven otherwise." Her words hung in the air, prompting a sharp intake of breath from Eliza. Thomas stopped pacing. "Suspect? But it's clear. Croft took his own life. The vial, the note." Inspector Graves entered then, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Not so clear, Reverend. We've uncovered a few discrepancies. For one, Mr. Lang here was seen arguing with the deceased near the churchyard yesterday evening." He turned to the curate, his mustache twitching. "Care to explain?" Lang flushed, his hands clenching at his sides. "It was nothing, a misunderstanding. He approached me after evensong, ranting about parish affairs, accused me of meddling in things that didn't concern me. I told him to leave. He had no business there. But I swear, Inspector, I left him alive and well. Went straight home to my rooms upstairs." Graves consulted his notes. "Witnesses say it was heated, raised voices, gestures. What exactly did he mean by meddling?" Lang hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "Something about funds, old donations from London days. He seemed to think I was involved in some cover-up. Ridiculous, of course." Miss Marple interjected gently, her voice like a soothing balm. "Young men often find themselves in such scrapes. But tell me, Mr. Lang, did Croft mention specifics? Names, perhaps?" Lang shook his head. "No, just vague accusations. I dismissed it as the ravings of a troubled soul." The inspector nodded, turning to Dr. Thorne, who had returned unexpectedly, her medical bag in hand. "And you, Doctor, the vial is from your surgery. When did you notice it missing?" Thorne's eyes flashed. "This morning, after you asked." The cabinet was forced, subtle but definite. "I lock it every night. Someone must have broken in yesterday afternoon while I was on calls." Graves pressed. "Any enemies, Doctor?" "You've a grudge against the Hales. That business with your brother years ago." Thorne's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. "Grudge? Yes, the Reverend's testimony helped send my brother to prison for embezzlement. But murder? I'd be more inventive than poisoning a stranger to frame them. She fixed Thomas with a stare. Though if I wanted revenge, I'd strike at the heart of their hypocrisy. Eliza bristled. How dare you? We've done nothing but serve this community. Thomas placed a hand on her arm. Enough. Inspector, surely the focus should be on Croft's motives for suicide. But Graves was unrelenting. Motives for murder, perhaps. Blackmail victims make prime suspects. He eyed the room. Anyone else with reason to silence him? Miss Marple, observing from her chair, noted the subtle shifts. Eliza's averted gaze, Lang's fidgeting, Thorne's defiant posture. She rose, excusing herself to freshen up, and slipped into the hall, where Lily the housemaid was polishing silver with vigorous strokes, as if to erase the day's stains. "Lily, dear," Miss Marple said softly, "you must be shaken. Did you know Mr. Croft at all?" Lily paused, her cloth twisting in her hands. "No, miss. Never seen him before last night. But I overheard bits from the study. He was angry, demanding money. Said something about a woman in London ruined by the Reverend." Her voice dropped. "And later, around 1, I saw Mrs. Hale in the garden. She said it was the cat, but she looked scared, miss, clutching her robe like a ghost." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Cats do wander, but at such hours? Thank you, Lily." She filed the information away, recalling how alibis often crumbled under scrutiny, like poorly baked pastry. Outside, the investigation continued. A constable reported finding a discarded glove near the side gate, leather, monogrammed with initials that didn't match anyone in the household. "Could be a red herring," Graves muttered, bagging it. Colonel Bantry, having inserted himself as a consultant, boomed, "In my day, we'd check for fingerprints. Modern methods, eh?" By lunchtime, the vicarage household attempted a meal, though appetites were scant. Miss Marple joined them at Eliza's insistence, the table laid with cold meats and salad, the conversation stilted. "This poison," Miss Marple ventured, "cyanide. It's not common. Where might one obtain it besides the doctor's?" Thorne, who had stayed at Graves' request, replied dryly, "Photographic chemicals, pest control. But pure form, medical or industrial. Croft could have brought it himself." Lang added, "Or stolen it." He seemed desperate enough. Post-meal, Graves summoned Lang for further questioning in the morning room. "Your argument? Witnesses say Croft mentioned parish funds. Care to elaborate?" Lang sighed. "It's sensitive. There's been discrepancies in the charity accounts, small amounts missing. I was investigating quietly. Croft implied he knew something, but it was bluster." Graves' eyes narrowed. "Missing funds? Motive for you to silence him?" Lang protested. "Absurd. I'm the one uncovering it." Meanwhile, Miss Marple strolled the garden with Eliza, the air fragrant with damp earth and roses. "My dear," she said, "you seem burdened beyond this tragedy. That letter from London, could it be connected?" Eliza faltered. "Thomas says it's nothing, but Croft, he knew things about our past." They paused by the rose bushes, now cordoned with tape. Miss Marple examined a broken stem. "Thorns catch everything. Look, fabric snag, not from Croft's coat." Eliza paled. "What does it mean?" Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. "Perhaps someone else was here." Afternoon brought more villagers to the gates, their curiosity piqued. Mrs. Eleanor Croft, no relation, but the name sparked whispers, arrived with a pie, her robust frame blocking the path. "Terrible business," she told Miss Marple, who had stepped out. "Heard the doctor and Reverend arguing yesterday at the surgery." Loud words about old grudges. Miss Marple thanked her, adding another thread to her mental tapestry. Back inside, she overheard Thorne confronting Thomas in the hall. "Your testimony ruined my family. If Croft was blackmailing you over that embezzlement, perhaps you silenced him." Thomas retorted, "Lies! I spoke truth, and your access to poison makes you suspect." Graves intervened, separating them. "Everyone has alibis to check. Lang, you were alone upstairs. Eliza, the garden sighting. Doctor, your surgery break-in. Convenient." As evening approached, Miss Marple visited the inn where Croft had stayed. The innkeeper, a jovial man named Mr. Hargreaves, showed her the room, Spartan, with a suitcase half-packed. He was agitated, Hargreaves said, muttered about settling scores with the vicar, left after dinner, returned briefly, then out again into the storm. In the suitcase Miss Marple spotted papers, letters, faded, mentioning London and a betrayal. "May I?" she asked, and Hargreaves nodded. One letter referenced a woman named Clara, ruined by scandal. "Clara," Miss Marple murmured. "Eliza's middle name?" Returning to the vicarage, she found chaos. Graves arresting Lang on finding a poison vial wrapper in his wastebasket. "It's a setup!" Lang cried. "Someone planted it!" Thomas and Eliza watched in horror as he was led away. Miss Marple comforted Eliza. "Don't despair. Red herrings abound." But privately, she doubted Lang's guilt. His motive weak, the evidence too obvious. Night fell, the village abuzz with suspects. Lang's argument, Thorne's grudge, Eliza's midnight wander, Thomas's past. Miss Marple, back home, knitted by lamplight, her mind unraveling the knots. Suspects emerge, she thought, but the true culprit hides in plain sight. The chapter closed with Saint, elms settling uneasily, the vicarage lights burning late, shadows dancing like accusations. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The afternoon sun hung low over Saint, elms casting long shadows that stretched across the village like fingers probing for secrets. The initial shock of Harold Croft's death had settled into a restless hum of speculation, with villagers exchanging hushed theories in the post office, the pub, and the shaded corners of the green. The vicarage, once a beacon of moral certainty, now stood as a lightning rod for suspicion, its inhabitants caught in a web of doubt spun by the previous day's grim discovery. The air was thick with the scent of late summer blooms and the undercurrent of unease, as if the very roses in the vicarage garden whispered of hidden truths. Miss Jane Marple, having spent the morning gleaning fragments of information from her visit to the vicarage, returned to her cottage for a moment of reflection. She sat at her small oak table, a pot of tea steaming beside her, her knitting needles idle for once as she stared out at the village below. The vicarage loomed in the distance, its chimneys puffing faint wisps of smoke, a deceptive picture of domestic calm. "Whispers of the past," she murmured to herself, her mind turning over the threads of the mystery, the midnight visitor, the poison vial, the cryptic note, and now the emerging suspects, each with motives tangled like ivy. Her nephew Raymond West, a writer of some repute who often visited to escape the clamor of London, arrived unexpectedly, his motor-car rattling up the lane. He was a lean man in his 30s, with a penchant for intellectual debates and a fondness for his aunt's unerring insights. "Aunt Jane," he called, striding into the cottage with a grin. "I heard there's been a spot of bother at the vicarage." "A body in the garden? Sounds like one of my novels." He settled into a chair, accepting a cup of tea with a flourish. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Life often outstrips fiction, Raymond. Human nature is predictable, yet endlessly surprising. This business with Mr. Croft, it's more than a simple suicide, I fear." She recounted the details, the midnight confrontation, the cyanide vial from Dr. Thorne's surgery, the note reading, "The truth must out," and the accusations swirling around Reverend Hale, Eliza, Mr. Lang, and even Dr. Thorne. Raymond leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Blackmail, you say? That points to secrets, old ones, if Croft was from the Reverend's London days. And Lang arrested? Seems a bit hasty." Miss Marple nodded. "Too hasty, perhaps. The wrapper in his room, conveniently found. A red herring, I suspect, to divert attention." She sipped her tea, her mind drifting to a case in St. Mary Mead, where a planted clue had nearly misled the police. "The past is key here, Raymond." Croft's visit stirred something buried, and someone ensured he wouldn't speak again. Determined to probe deeper, Miss Marple decided to visit the inn where Croft had stayed, hoping to uncover more about his intentions. Raymond offered to drive, and they set off, the car bouncing along the rutted lanes. The inn, a low-beamed building called the Three Crowns, stood at the village's edge, its sign creaking in the breeze. Mr. Hargreaves, the innkeeper, greeted them with a nod, his round face flushed from tending the bar. "Miss Marple, Mr. West. Come about poor Croft, I reckon. Terrible business." "Indeed, Mr. Hargreaves," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but probing. "Might we see his room again?" "I understand he left some papers." Hargreaves led them upstairs to a small, sparsely furnished chamber, its window overlooking the churchyard. The suitcase remained, its contents untouched since Miss Marple's earlier visit. She examined the letters again, noting the references to a London scandal, a theft at a charity event, accusations against Thomas Hale, and a woman named Clara. "Mr. Hargreaves," she asked, "did Croft say anything about his purpose here?" The innkeeper scratched his chin. "He was cagey, miss. Kept to himself mostly, but one night over a pint he muttered about a web of lies involving the vicar. Said he'd come to set things right. Sounded personal." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Personal enough to blackmail? Or to be killed for?" Hargreaves shrugged. "Couldn't say. He left after dinner, came back briefly, then out again into the storm. Never saw him alive after that." Miss Marple thanked him, tucking a letter into her handbag for closer study later, a liberty she took with a murmured apology, knowing Hargreaves wouldn't object. As they left, she noticed a photograph on the inn's wall, a group of men in formal attire, dated 20 years prior, with a younger Thomas Hale among them. "Curious," she said to Raymond. "The past is closer than we think." Back at the cottage, Raymond sprawled in an armchair, flipping through the letter. Clara again, and dates matching that London theft. "Aunt Jane, do you think Eliza's involved?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Not directly, perhaps. But she knows more than she lets on. Her nervousness, Lily's sighting in the garden, these are not mere coincidence." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Colonel Bantry, his pipe smoke trailing him like a faithful dog. He knocked briskly, entering with a hearty, "Miss Marple! Heard you're poking about this Croft business. Thought I'd offer my expertise. Seen my share of mysteries in the colonies, you know." He launched into a tale of a poisoning in Bombay, but Miss Marple steered him gently. "Colonel, you mentioned seeing a figure near the churchyard that night. Could it have been Croft?" Bantry puffed thoughtfully. "Possible. It was dark, storm brewing. Thought it was a fox at first, but the shape was human, skulking by the yew trees. Could have been Lang and Croft arguing, as the boy Tommy said." Miss Marple nodded. "Or someone else entirely. Shadows are deceptive. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside, the postman delivering a telegram to the vicarage, visible from Miss Marple's window. "More news from afar," she mused. Raymond offered to investigate, but she declined. "Let's not stir the pot yet. The village is doing that well enough." By evening, Miss Marple attended a parish meeting at the church hall, a gathering hastily arranged to address community concerns about the death. The room buzzed with villagers, Mrs. Croft with her robust opinions, Mr. Jenkins clutching his post-bag, the baker's wife whispering to neighbors. Reverend Hale stood at the podium, his face drawn, attempting to restore calm. "Friends, we must trust in justice and divine guidance. Mr. Croft's death is a tragedy, but we must not leap to judgment." Dr. Thorne, seated near the front, stood abruptly. "Justice? What about truth, Reverend? Croft came here with accusations about you, your past. Care to enlighten us?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Thomas. He faltered, then said, "He was a troubled man, revisiting old grievances. I refused his demands, and he took his life. That's all." Eliza, beside him, gripped his arm, her face pale. Lang, released on bail pending further evidence, sat at the back, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple, in a corner with her knitting, watched the interplay. Thorne's aggression, Thomas's evasion, Eliza's fear. She leaned toward Mrs. Price, seated nearby. "Dr. Thorne seems very certain. Has she spoken of her brother lately?" Mrs. Price whispered, "Oh, yes. Says the Reverend's testimony ruined him, lost his job, his reputation. She's bitter as gall." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "Bitterness can cloud judgment or sharpen intent." After the meeting, Miss Marple lingered, overhearing Lang and Eliza in a quiet corner. "You mustn't worry," Lang said, his voice low. "I'll handle the accounts. No one will know." Eliza's reply was sharp. "Geoffrey, it's too dangerous now, with Croft dead." She stopped, spotting Miss Marple, and hurried away. Returning home, Miss Marple spread the stolen letter on her table, its faded ink revealing more of the London scandal. A charity theft, Hale accused but cleared, a woman named Clara dismissed in disgrace. "Eliza Clara Hale," she mused. A coincidence? Or a key? She recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a woman's past indiscretions led to murder, a lover scorned, a secret exposed. Raymond, still there, speculated. Suppose Croft was Clara's accomplice, back for revenge? Or her lover? Miss Marple shook her head. Possible, but the poison suggests calculation, not passion. And Lang's arrest, too convenient. Someone wants us looking elsewhere. As night fell, Miss Marple lit a lamp, her knitting resumed. The village lights twinkled below, the vicarage a focal point of shadow and secrets. "Whispers of the past," she said aloud, "but whose voice speaks loudest?" She thought of Lily's furtive glance, Thorne's grudge, Eliza's midnight wander. The puzzle was incomplete, but the pieces were falling into place. The chapter closed with Saint, elms settling into an uneasy quiet, the vicarage lights flickering like a beacon of unresolved truths. Miss Marple, her needles clicking rhythmically, knew the past was not done whispering. It was shouting, if only one knew where to listen. Chapter 6. Hidden Affairs. The evening draped Saint, elms in a velvet cloak of twilight, the sky deepening to indigo as stars began to prick through the heavens. The village, still reeling from the shock of Harold Croft's death, seemed to hold its breath, as if wary of what further secrets the night might unveil. The vicarage, its windows aglow with lamplight, stood as a silent witness to the tension simmering within, while the rest of Saint. Elms retreated into the comforting routines of supper and fireside chats. Yet the air was charged with an unspoken anticipation, like the pause before a storm breaks. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her cottage by the window, her knitting needles poised over the ever-growing blue blanket, gazed out at the village below. The events of the past 2 days had woven a complex tapestry of clues and contradictions. The midnight visitor, the poisoned body in the garden, the cryptic note, and the web of suspicions entangling the Hales, Mr. Lang, and Dr. Thorne. Her conversation with Raymond at the inn had unearthed fragments of Croft's intentions, a London scandal, a woman named Clara, and a vendetta against Reverend Hale. But it was Lily's whispered observation of Eliza in the garden, coupled with the planted evidence against Lang, that tugged at Miss Marple's intuition. "The truth lies in the shadows," she murmured, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. "And shadows are cast by those closest to the light." Determined to probe deeper into the vicarage's secrets, Miss Marple decided to pay an impromptu visit to Eliza Hale under the pretext of delivering a jar of her homemade damson jam, a gesture that, in her experience, often loosened tongues. She donned her tweed coat, pinned her hat firmly against the evening breeze, and set out, her walking stick tapping a purposeful cadence on the cobblestones. The village was quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog and the faint strains of a piano from the schoolmaster's cottage. As she approached the vicarage, she noted a flicker of movement behind the drawing-room curtains, a silhouette pacing, perhaps Eliza herself. Inside, the vicarage was a study in contrasts. The warmth of polished wood and glowing lamps clashed with the palpable strain among its inhabitants. Eliza answered the door, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Miss Marple, how kind," she said, her voice strained but polite. "Please, come in. I'm afraid we're not much company tonight." She led the way to the drawing-room, where a fire crackled half-heartedly in the grate. Reverend Thomas was absent, likely in his study, while Mr. Lang sat at a small table, poring over parish accounts, his brow furrowed in concentration. Miss Marple presented the jam with a smile. "Just a small token, my dear. I thought it might lift your spirits." She settled into a chair, her sharp eyes noting the disarray of the room, a shawl draped carelessly over a sofa, a teacup left unwashed on a sideboard. Signs of a household unsettled. "How are you holding up with all this turmoil?" Eliza sank onto the sofa, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. "It's dreadful, Miss Marple. The inspector's questions, Geoffrey's arrest, though he's free for now, thank goodness, and Thomas, he's so distant. That man, Croft, brought back such painful memories." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple leaned forward, her tone gentle but probing. "Memories of London, perhaps." The scandal Croft mentioned? Eliza's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. You know about that. She hesitated, then sighed, as if the weight of silence was too much to bear. It was 20 years ago, before we came here. A theft at a charity event. Thomas was accused, wrongly of course. He was cleared, but the whispers lingered. Croft was involved somehow, an associate from those days. He came demanding money, threatening to expose things. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind racing. Things about Thomas? Or someone else? Eliza's gaze dropped to her lap. I had a moment of weakness back then. A man, a solicitor, charming, persuasive. I was young, foolish. It ended quickly, but Croft knew. He threatened to tell the village, ruin us both. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her handkerchief. My dear, Miss Marple said softly, patting her hand. Secrets fester like untreated wounds. Did you tell Thomas about Croft's threat? Eliza shook her head. No, but he guessed. Croft hinted at it in the study that night. Thomas was furious, but I swear, Miss Marple, neither of us harmed him. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind catalogued the confession. Eliza's affair, Croft's knowledge, a motive for silence. Of course, my dear. But the garden, Lily saw you there after midnight. Checking on the cat, you said? Eliza flushed. Yes, I couldn't sleep after Croft left. I thought I heard the cat yowling. It was nothing. Their conversation was interrupted by Lang, who looked up from his accounts. Mrs. Hale, perhaps you should rest. This is too much. His tone was protective, almost proprietary, and Miss Marple noted the glance that passed between them, brief, but charged with unspoken understanding. Mr. Lang, she said, turning to him, you've been most helpful to the Hales. Those accounts you're reviewing. Troublesome, I hear. Lang stiffened, his pen pausing mid-stroke. Minor discrepancies, Miss Marple. Nothing serious. I'm sorting it out. But his eyes darted to Eliza, and Miss Marple sensed a thread of secrecy tying them together. She rose, thanking Eliza for her hospitality, and promised to return soon. As she left, she glimpsed Thomas emerging from his study, his face etched with worry, clutching a crumpled letter, perhaps the one from London that had sparked this chain of events. Outside, the night air was cool, the village hushed, save for the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple paused by the vicarage gate, her thoughts turning to the letter she'd found in Croft's suitcase, mentioning Clara and the scandal. Eliza, Clara Hale. Too neat a fit to be coincidence. But was her affair the heart of the matter, or a distraction? She recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a woman's indiscretions had masked a deeper crime. The lover, a pawn in a larger game. Her musings were interrupted by a figure approaching from the churchyard. Doctor. Amelia Thorne, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, her expression grim. Miss Marple, out late? She called, her voice sharp but not unkind. I suppose you're untangling this mess, as usual. Just a neighborly visit, Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. You've been busy, Doctor? Any new findings about the poison? Thorne's eyes narrowed. Confirmed cyanide, as I thought. But the vial, my initials were scratched into the base, almost deliberately. Someone wants me implicated. She hesitated, then added, I saw Lang near my surgery yesterday afternoon before the break-in. Odd, don't you think? Miss Marple filed the observation away. Odd indeed. But we mustn't jump to conclusions. They parted ways, Thorne striding toward her cottage, Miss Marple toward hers. The doctor's accusation against Lang was plausible, yet her own grudge against the Hales made her an unreliable narrator. Everyone has a motive, Miss Marple thought, but motives are like shadows, distorted until you find the source. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and spread Croft's letter on the table, its faded ink a window to the past. References to the charity theft, Hale's exoneration, and Clara's disgrace were interspersed with cryptic phrases. Betrayal runs deep. Promises broken. She pondered Eliza's confession. An affair, yes, but was it the whole story? The solicitor lover intrigued her. In village life, such entanglements often left ripples that resurfaced years later. A knock at the door startled her. It was Raymond, back from a drive to the next village, his face alight with news. "Aunt Jane, I stopped by the post office. Jenkins let slip that another telegram arrived for the Reverend today, from London, urgent. And I heard from a pub regular that Croft was asking about a woman named Clara at the inn days before he died." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Clara again, and another telegram. "The past is insistent, Raymond." They discussed the case over cocoa, Raymond theorizing wildly, Croft as a jilted lover, Eliza as a femme fatale, Lang as a conspirator. Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting fact from fancy. "You're half right," she said at last. "But the truth is simpler, yet more complex. Someone wanted Croft silent, but not for the obvious reasons." As midnight approached, Miss Marple sat alone, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a metronome to her thoughts. The vicarage, she knew, held more secrets, perhaps in Eliza's drawer, where love letters might lurk, or in Lang's accounts, where numbers could betray more than words. The arrest of Lang, the glove, the vial wrapper, all red herrings, she suspected, designed to obscure the true hand at work. Outside, the village slept, its cottages dark save for the vicarage, where a single light burned in the study. Miss Marple imagined Thomas poring over that telegram, Eliza tossing in her bed, Lang wrestling with his accounts. "Hidden affairs," she whispered, "but whose heart hides the darkest intent?" The chapter closed with Saint. Elms wrapped in silence, the vicarage a crucible of secrets waiting to boil over. Miss Marple, her mind a whirl of possibilities, knew the next thread she pulled might unravel the entire web, or lead her deeper into its tangle. Chapter 7. The False Clue. The morning mist clung to Saint, elms like a gossamer veil, softening the outlines of cottages and church spire as the village stirred to life. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading roses, a reminder of the storm that had ushered in Harold Croft's fateful visit and the grim discovery that followed. 3 days had passed since the body was found in the vicarage garden, and the village buzzed with a restless energy, as if the very cobblestones whispered of murder. The vicarage remained the focal point of suspicion, its inhabitants moving through their duties with the strained precision of actors on a stage, aware of the audience beyond their walls. Miss Jane Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of village life, sat in her cottage, her breakfast tray untouched save for a half-drunk cup of tea. Her knitting lay idle, the blue wool pooled in her lap, as she pondered the threads of the mystery, Croft's blackmail, Eliza's confession of a past affair, Lang's questionable arrest, and Dr. Thorne's pointed accusations. The planted vial wrapper in Lang's room had struck her as too convenient, a clumsy attempt to shift blame. Red herrings, she murmured, her sharp eyes fixed on the vicarage in the distance, its chimneys barely visible through the mist. But whose hand scatters them? Her reverie was broken by a knock at the door. It was Lily, the vicarage housemaid, her young face pale and her apron twisted in nervous fingers. "Miss Marple, I'm sorry to bother you so early," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if fearing pursuit. "But I found something in the garden shed, and I didn't know who else to tell." Miss Marple ushered her inside, offering a chair and a biscuit from a tin. "Sit, dear, and tell me slowly. What did you find?" Lily hesitated, then pulled a small bundle from her pocket, a leather glove, stained dark at the fingertips, monogrammed with the initials A.T. "It was tucked behind a sack of potting soil," she whispered. "I think it's Doctor. Thorns, and the stains. Could be blood." Miss Marple examined the glove, her fingers tracing the stitching. The stains were sticky, reddish-brown, but a faint fruity scent suggested something less sinister. Blood, or perhaps raspberry jam from the vicarage kitchen? And the monogram. Too obvious, don't you think? She smiled reassuringly at Lily. "You did well to bring it to me. But tell me, when did you find it?" "Yesterday evening, miss, after the police left. I was tidying the shed. Mrs. Hale asked me to check the tools. I didn't tell the inspector. He's so quick to blame." Mr. Lily's eyes were earnest, but Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease, as if the girl held back more than she shared. "And did you see anyone near the shed recently?" Miss Marple asked gently. Lily shook her head. "No, but Mrs. Hale was in the garden again last night, late. Said it was the cat again, but she was near the shed, poking about." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. "Thank you, Lily. Keep this between us for now. We mustn't stir the pot without cause." After Lily left, Miss Marple wrapped the glove in a clean cloth and tucked it into a drawer. She donned her coat and hat, determined to visit the vicarage and test the waters further. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the village in sharper relief, the post office bustling, the bakery's chimney puffing, the churchyard silent save for a lone groundskeeper raking leaves. As she approached the vicarage, she saw Inspector Graves's motor car parked askew, a sign of his continued presence. Inside, the atmosphere was taut as a drawn bowstring. Reverend Thomas Hale sat in the drawing-room, his sermon notes scattered across a table, his face etched with fatigue. Eliza stood by the window, her posture rigid, while Mr. Lang, reinstated to his duties despite the cloud of suspicion, sorted hymnals with mechanical precision. Inspector Graves occupied the morning room, questioning the innkeeper, Mr. Hargreaves, who had been summoned to clarify Croft's movements. Miss Marple knocked softly and was admitted by Eliza, who managed a strained smile. "Miss Marple, you're a welcome sight. This house feels like a prison." She gestured to a chair where Miss Marple settled, her basket of knitting a comforting prop. "It's a trying time," Miss Marple said sympathetically. "Inspector Graves seems thorough, but such thoroughness can be unsettling." Thomas looked up, his voice weary. "He's convinced it's murder, not suicide. Keeps harping on that glove they found by the gate. Initials didn't match any of us, but now he's back to questioning Geoffrey." Lang interjected, his tone sharp. "It's absurd. That wrapper in my room, someone planted it. And now this glove business. It's as if the killer wants to keep us all guessing. Before Miss Marple could respond, Graves entered, holding the glove Lily had mentioned, now bagged as evidence. "Found this in the shed this morning," he announced, his mustache bristling. "Monogrammed A.T., Doctor. Thorne's initials, and the stains. Preliminary tests suggest blood, though we're sending it for analysis. Care to explain, Reverend? Mrs. Hale?" Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Blood? That's impossible." Thomas stood, his voice firm. "Inspector, you're grasping at straws. Dr. Thorne has no reason to harm Croft." But Graves' eyes narrowed. "She's got a grudge against you, Reverend. And access to cyanide." This glove could be the key. Miss Marple interposed gently. "Inspector, might I see it?" Graves, accustomed to her meddling, handed it over with a grunt. She examined it closely, noting the stain's uneven spread. "Curious," she said. "The pattern suggests it was dipped, not splattered. And the scent, faintly sweet, like preserves. Could it be a kitchen mishap, mistaken for blood?" Graves frowned. "Jam? That's a stretch." Miss Marple. Dr. Thorne arrived moments later, summoned by a constable. Her face darkened at the sight of the glove. "That's mine," she admitted, her voice icy. "Lost it weeks ago. Left it in the garden when I was pruning for Mrs. Hale. Someone's trying to pin this on me." She fixed Thomas with a stare. "Your enemies are clever, Reverend." Graves pressed her. "And your surgery break-in? Convenient timing. Were you setting this up to frame the Hales?" Thorne laughed bitterly. "If I wanted revenge, I'd do better than a clumsy glove. Check my records. I reported the theft before Croft died." The room crackled with tension, accusations flying like sparks. Eliza, trembling, said, "This is madness." "We're all being played," Lang added, "the real killer's laughing while we bicker." Miss Marple, silent, observed their reactions. Thorne's defiance, Thomas's restraint, Eliza's fear, Lang's frustration. The glove, she suspected, was another red herring, placed to deepen the confusion. Excusing herself to stretch her legs, Miss Marple wandered to the garden where the rose bushes stood as mute witnesses to the crime. She examined the shed, its door still ajar, the spade from the previous day now cleaned of soil. "Too clean," she murmured, noting scuff marks on the floor, as if something had been dragged. She recalled Lily's tale of Eliza's late-night visit. Checking the cat, or something more? Back inside, she found Lily in the kitchen, scrubbing pots with a vigor that suggested distraction. "Lily, dear," Miss Marple said, "you mentioned Mrs. Hale near the shed last night. Did you see what she was doing?" Lily hesitated, her hands pausing. "Not exactly, miss. She was holding a lantern, looking at the ground. Said she heard a noise, but it was quick. She went back inside." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the glove's placement. "And the shed. Has anyone else been there recently?" Lily shook her head. "Just me, for chores. And Mr. Lang, sometimes, for tools." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple sensed she was holding back. "Thank you, dear. You've been most helpful." As noon approached, Miss Marple joined Raymond for a walk to the village green, where Colonel Bantry held court, regaling a small crowd with tales of his military days. Spotting Miss Marple, he waved her over. "Heard about the glove, Miss Marple? Damning evidence, eh?" "Point straight to the doctor." Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. "Evidence can be deceptive, Colonel." Like a mirage in your desert campaigns, Raymond, walking beside her, whispered, "That glove's too perfect, Aunt Jane." Planted like the wrapper. Miss Marple nodded. Precisely. Someone wants us chasing shadows. But the real clue lies elsewhere, in motives, not objects. At the post office, Mr. Jenkins confirmed the arrival of another telegram for Thomas, its contents undisclosed but urgent. He looked shaken, Jenkins confided, muttered something about old debts coming due. Miss Marple thanked him, her thoughts circling back to the London scandal, the woman named Clara, and Eliza's tearful confession. By afternoon, the village was abuzz with the glove's discovery. Mrs. Price, meeting Miss Marple at the bakery, exclaimed, "Doctor, Thorne's glove and blood. She's the one, isn't she?" Miss Marple demurred. "We mustn't rush to judgment. Things are seldom what they seem." But inwardly, she suspected the glove was a distraction, its stains likely jam from the vicarage pantry, placed to incriminate Thorne and divert attention from the true culprit. Returning home, Miss Marple spread Croft's letter on her table, its references to betrayal and Clara nagging at her. She recalled Eliza's affair, Lang's secretive accounts, Thorne's grudge. The false clue points away, she mused, but the truth lies closer to home. Her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a countdown to revelation. The chapter closed with Saint, elms settling into an uneasy dusk, the vicarage lights burning late, shadows dancing within. Miss Marple, her mind a whirl of possibilities, knew the next thread she pulled might unravel the mystery, or tighten the noose around an innocent neck. Chapter 8. Tangled Motives. The late afternoon sun bathed Saint, elms in a golden haze, softening the sharp edges of the village's ancient stones and lending a deceptive calm to the air. The scandal of Harold Croft's death, now 4 days past, had woven itself into the fabric of daily life, with villagers exchanging theories over tea and shop counters, their voices a blend of curiosity and unease. The vicarage, its red brick facade serene against the backdrop of rolling hills, remained the epicenter of suspicion, its inhabitants moving through their routines with the guarded precision of those under scrutiny. The garden, where Croft's body had been found, was now cordoned off with police tape, the rose bushes standing as silent sentinels to secrets yet unrevealed. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her cottage with a cup of tea cooling beside her, pondered the intricate Uppsala puzzle of motives and alibis that had emerged since Croft's death. Her knitting lay untouched, the blue wool resting in her lap as she sifted through the clues. Croft's blackmail, Eliza's affair, Lang's dubious arrest, Thorne's grudge, and the suspicious glove stained with what might be jam rather than blood. The vile wrapper in Lang's room and the monogrammed glove in the shed struck her as deliberate distractions, red herrings cast to muddy the waters. "Tangled motives," she murmured, her sharp eyes fixed on the distant vicarage, where lights flickered in the gathering dusk. But whose hand weaves the web? Her nephew Raymond West, who had lingered in St. Elm's to witness the unfolding drama, knocked at the door, his face alight with news. "Aunt Jane, I've been to the pub," he announced, striding in with a newspaper under his arm. "The locals are buzzing about a telegram from London. Turns out Croft wasn't Croft at all. He was Elias Black, a known con artist with a history of blackmail. The police confirmed it this morning." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose, her interest piqued. "Elias Black?" That changes things. A con artist suggests a broader net of victims. She invited Raymond to sit, pouring him tea as she considered the revelation. Did the telegram mention his connection to the Hales? Raymond nodded, unfolding the paper. Vaguely. It said Black was linked to a London charity theft 20 years ago, where Reverend Hale was accused, but cleared. Black disappeared after, presumed dead. Now he's back, or was, demanding money. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. A man with enemies, then. But why return now? And why die here? Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Colonel Bantry, his pipe smoke curling around him like a faithful companion. Miss Marple, I've been thinking about that glove, he boomed, settling into a chair uninvited. Thorne's initials, blood or jam, it's a plant, isn't it? Someone's playing a clever game. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Indeed, Colonel. Clues can be as misleading as gossip. What else have you heard? Bantry puffed thoughtfully. Talk at the inn suggests Black was asking about a woman named Clara, someone wronged in that old scandal. People think it's Mrs. Hale. Miss Marple nodded, recalling Eliza's confession of an affair. Clara is her middle name. But the affair alone seems insufficient motive for murder. Determined to probe further, Miss Marple decided to visit the vicarage again, this time to confront the tangled motives head-on. She donned her coat and hat, her walking stick tapping rhythmically as she navigated the village lanes. The evening air was cool, scented with fading lavender, and the vicarage loomed ahead, its windows glowing like wary eyes. At the gate she paused, noting a constable lingering by the garden, his flashlight sweeping the rose bushes for overlooked clues. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Reverend Thomas Hale sat in the drawing-room, his sermon notes abandoned, his face etched with exhaustion. Eliza stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly, while Mr. Lang, still under suspicion despite his release, polished a candlestick with unnecessary vigor. "Miss Marple," Thomas greeted, his voice strained, "you're a beacon of calm in this storm." She settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her side. "It's a trying time, Reverend." "I've heard, Mr. Croft was Elias Black, a man with a dubious past." "Did you know?" Thomas paled, his eyes darting to Eliza. "Not until recently. He was my partner in a failed business in London, before my calling. The charity theft ended our association. I thought he'd died years ago." Eliza interjected, her voice sharp. "He came to ruin us, Thomas. That letter from London, it warned you he was alive, didn't it?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, but I didn't expect him to show up here, threatening to expose everything." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Everything? The theft, or something more personal?" Before Thomas could reply, "Doctor." Thorne burst in, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, her face stormy. "I've had enough of this," she snapped, glaring at the Hales. "The police are hounding me about that glove, and I won't stand for it." "Reverend, you know why I despise you? Your testimony destroyed my brother. Did you kill Black to keep him quiet?" Thomas stood, his voice trembling with anger. "That's slander, Amelia. I was cleared of wrongdoing. You're the one with access to cyanide. Perhaps you framed us." Thorne laughed bitterly. "If I wanted revenge, I'd be subtler." "That glove was stolen, planted to incriminate me," Miss Marple interposed gently. "Accusations are like thorns, sharp but often misplaced." "Doctor, when did you last see that glove?" Thorne frowned. Weeks ago, in the garden. I left it after pruning. Someone took it. Someone who knew my habits." The room fell silent, the weight of suspicion palpable. Lang spoke up, his tone defensive. "This is absurd. The wrapper in my room, the glove. Someone's orchestrating this. I was investigating parish funds, yes, but I found nothing damning. Black's accusations were lies." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Lies or half-truths? Funds are delicate matters." Mr. Lang Eliza's voice broke the tension. "Enough. We're all victims here. Croft, Black, wanted to destroy our lives. Maybe he deserved it." Her outburst drew gasps, and Thomas grabbed her arm. "Eliza, hush!" But Miss Marple noted the slip, a motive laid bare. Excusing herself, Miss Marple slipped into the hall, where Lily was dusting a mirror with furtive glances toward the drawing-room. "Lily, dear," Miss Marple said softly, "you've been so helpful. Did you ever hear Mr. Black mention a woman named Clara?" Lily hesitated, her cloth pausing. "Once, miss, at the inn. He said Clara was betrayed, left to rot. Sounded angry, like it was personal." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Clara, Eliza's middle name, tied to an affair and a scandal. Was Black her lover, her betrayer, or something else? She recalled a saint, Mary Mead case where a scorned lover's return sparked murder, but the motives here were murkier, tangled with parish secrets and old grudges. Outside, Inspector Graves was inspecting the shed, his flashlight illuminating the spade Miss Marple had noticed earlier. "Miss Marple," he grunted, "still poking about?" She smiled, merely observing Inspector. "That spade, cleaned recently, wasn't it?" Graves nodded. "Too clean. No prints, but scuff marks suggest something was moved. We're testing for traces returning home. Miss Marple met Raymond in the lane, his face alight with gossip. Aunt Jane, the pub's alive with talk. They say Black was seen with a woman in London recently, not Eliza, but someone younger. Could it be a new player?" Miss Marple's eyes widened. "A younger woman? That complicates things." At her cottage, she spread Black's letter on the table, its references to Clara, and betrayal now joined by a new possibility. A third party, perhaps pulling strings from afar. Tangled motives, she mused, her knitting needles clicking. Black's death served someone's purpose, but whose? The Hales, Thorne, Lang, or an unseen hand? The night deepened, the village silent, save for the vicarage's restless lights. Miss Marple, her mind a whirl of possibilities, sensed the truth lurking just out of reach, hidden in the motives that twisted like vines around the vicarage's heart. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The 5th day since Harold Croft's death, or rather Elias Black's, as his true identity had now been revealed, dawned over St. Elms with a deceptive serenity. The village, bathed in the soft light of early autumn, seemed to pause, as if holding its breath before the inevitable storm of truth broke. The vicarage, its red brick walls glowing warmly in the morning sun, stood as a silent sentinel at the heart of the mystery, its inhabitants moving through their duties with the strained grace of those aware they were watched. The rose bushes in the garden, still cordoned by police tape, drooped under the weight of dew, their thorns a quiet reminder of the violence that had unfolded among them. Miss Jane Marple, ever the observer of human nature's subtle currents, sat in her cottage, her breakfast tray bearing only a half-eaten slice of toast and a cooling pot of tea. Her knitting, The blue wool, now forming a delicate lace pattern, lay neglected as she pondered the thickening web of clues. Black's blackmail, Eliza's affair, Lang's questionable arrest, Thorne's grudge, and the planted glove with its suspicious stains. The revelation of Black's true identity as a con artist had added a new layer, suggesting a wider net of motives, while Lily's whispers about a woman named Clara and Eliza's late-night garden wanderings hinted at deeper secrets. "The storm gathers," Miss Marple murmured, her sharp eyes fixed on the vicarage through her window. "But where will the lightning strike?" Her musings were interrupted by the arrival of her nephew, Raymond West, who burst in with his usual energy, a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Aunt Jane, the village is positively electric," he exclaimed, tossing his hat onto a chair. "The police are digging into Black's past. Turns out he's fleeced half of London over the years. And there's talk of another letter found in his room, addressed to the Reverend, but never sent." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. "Another letter? That's significant, Raymond. We must see it." Determined to unravel the tangle of motives, Miss Marple devised a plan to bring the suspects together, a tactic she had employed in Saint Mary Mead, to stir hidden truths to the surface. "I shall invite them to tea at the vicarage," she told Raymond, her voice calm but resolute. "A gathering often loosens tongues, especially when nerves are frayed." Raymond grinned. "A classic Marple maneuver. Shall I play host?" She shook her head. "No, dear. I'll manage, but do keep your ears open at the pub. Village tongues wag freely there." By mid-morning, Miss Marple had sent notes to the vicarage, requesting a small tea gathering to offer solace in these troubled times. Eliza, eager for any semblance of normalcy, agreed, and by 3 o'clock the drawing-room was prepared with a lace-covered table, a silver tea service gleaming, and plates of sandwiches and scone. Arranged with care, the invited guests, Reverend Thomas Hale, Eliza, Mr. Geoffrey Lang, Dr. Amelia Thorne, and Inspector Graves, arrived with varying degrees of reluctance, their faces a gallery of tension, suspicion, and guarded politeness. Miss Marple, seated near the fireplace with her knitting basket at her side, surveyed the room with her usual deceptive mildness. Thomas sat stiffly, his clerical collar a stark contrast to his haggard expression. Eliza fidgeted with her teacup, her eyes darting to the door. Lang, still under suspicion, kept his gaze on the floor. Thorne's sharp features were set in defiance, and Graves, notebook in hand, looked like a man bracing for a battle of wits. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but commanding attention. "This tragedy has unsettled us all. I thought a quiet tea might help us reflect and perhaps clarify a few matters." The room tensed, as if her words had struck a hidden chord. Graves, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward. "Clarify? I'd say we need more than that, Miss Marple. We've got a dead con artist, a stolen vial, a planted glove, and motives thicker than this fog." He gestured to the window, where the morning mist lingered faintly. "Let's start with you, Reverend. You admitted Black was your old partner. What exactly did he have on you?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Nothing but lies. He claimed I profited from that charity theft 20 years ago." "I was cleared, Inspector. He was desperate, trying to extort money," Eliza interjected, her voice shrill. "He threatened to ruin us. Said he'd expose my foolishness from those days." Her eyes filled, and Miss Marple noted the admission. A calculated slip or genuine distress? Thorne scoffed, setting down her cup with a clink. Foolishness? You mean your affair, Mrs. Hale? Black knew about it, didn't he? That's why you were in the garden that night, wasn't it? To silence him? Eliza gasped, her face paling. How dare you? I was checking on the cat. Lang jumped to her defense. Leave her alone, Doctor. You're the one with cyanide access. Your glove was found in the shed. Thorne's eyes flashed. That glove was stolen, you fool. And what about you, Lang? Skulking near my surgery, arguing with Black in the churchyard? Those parish funds you're so keen on. Hiding something, are you? Lang flushed. I was investigating discrepancies, not stealing. Black's accusations were nonsense. The room erupted in accusations, voices overlapping like a discordant choir. Thomas accused Thorne of framing him to settle her brother's score. Eliza blamed Lang for stirring trouble with the accounts. Lang pointed to the glove as proof of Thorne's guilt. Graves, scribbling furiously, barked. Enough! You're all suspects until I say otherwise. Miss Marple, silent amid the storm, watched their faces, noting the cracks in their facades. Fear, anger, desperation. She interjected softly, her voice cutting through the din like a bell. Let's review the facts. Mr. Black arrived with threats of blackmail tied to a London scandal. He died by cyanide, a vial from Doctor. Thorne's surgery in his hand. A note, the truth must out, was found, along with a glove and a wrapper, both suspiciously placed, and Mrs. Hale was seen in the garden after midnight. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But what if the crime is not what it seems? The footprints in the garden, too shallow for a man's weight, suggesting a disguise. And the letter Raymond mentioned, found in Black's room. What does it say? Graves, startled, produced the letter, sealed, but addressed to Thomas. We haven't opened it yet, waiting for the coroner's approval. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Might I suggest you read it now? It may hold the key. With a grunt, Graves broke the seal, revealing a single sheet scrawled with Black's handwriting. Hale, you betrayed Clara and me. The theft was your idea, covered by your piety. I'll expose you unless you pay. Meet me again, midnight, the garden. The room fell silent, the words a thunderclap. Thomas paled, shaking his head. Lies! I never planned the theft. Eliza clutched his arm, her voice a whisper. Thomas, what does he mean? Thorne sneered. Sounds like a confession to me. Lang, silent, stared at the letter as if it burned. Miss Marple spoke again, her tone calm but incisive. The letter suggests Black believed Thomas guilty, but belief is not proof. And the footprints, disguised perhaps, to mislead. Someone wanted Black dead, but not for the reasons we've assumed. Her words hung in the air, stirring unease. Graves frowned. You're saying the blackmail was a ruse? Then who's the killer? Before anyone could respond, Lily entered with a fresh pot of tea, her hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple noted her glance toward Eliza, a flicker of something, fear or guilt. Lily, dear, she said, did you ever hear Mr. Black mention anyone else involved in his plans? Lily hesitated, then shook her head. No, miss. Just Clara and the Reverend. The tea ended abruptly, the suspects dispersing with muttered excuses. Graves promised to investigate the letter further, while Thorne stormed out, muttering about slander. Thomas and Eliza retreated to the study, Lang trailing behind, his face troubled. Miss Marple lingered, thanking Lily for the tea and slipping her a kind word. "You've been a pillar, dear, in such trying times." Outside, the village was settling into evening, the air cool and fragrant with wood smoke. Miss Marple walked home with Raymond, who speculated wildly. "That letter's a bombshell, Aunt Jane. Thomas planned the theft. Or is it another red herring?" She nodded thoughtfully. "It's a thread, Raymond, but not the whole cloth. Someone orchestrated this. Someone close." At her cottage, Miss Marple spread Black's letters on the table, their references to Clara, and betrayal now joined by the new accusation against Thomas. She recalled a Saint, Mary Mead case where a false letter had misled the police, masking a killer's true motive. "The gathering storm," she mused, her knitting needles clicking. But the truth lies in the quiet moments. Chapter 10. The Shocking Truth. The evening sky over St. Elms was a tapestry of deepening blues, streaked with clouds that glowed faintly from the last rays of a setting sun. 6 days had passed since Elias Black's body was found in the vicarage garden, and the village had settled into a tense equilibrium, its inhabitants caught between the desire for normalcy and the weight of unresolved suspicion. The vicarage, its windows aglow with lamplight, stood as a silent crucible where secrets simmered, ready to boil over. The rose bushes, now free of police tape, drooped as if weary of the secrets they had witnessed, their thorns catching the fading light like tiny barbs of truth. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles moving rhythmically, the blue wool forming an intricate lace pattern that mirrored the complexity of the mystery she was unraveling. The past days had woven a dense web of clues. Black's blackmail, revealed as Elias Black, a con artist with a vendetta, Eliza's confessed affair and her midnight wanderings, Lang's questionable arrest, tainted by planted evidence, Dr. Thorne's grudge and the suspicious glove, and the letter accusing Reverend Thomas Hale of orchestrating the London theft 20 years ago. Each thread pointed to motive, yet Miss Marple sensed a deeper pattern, one obscured by carefully placed red herrings. "The truth is like my knitting," she murmured, her sharp eyes fixed on the distant vicarage. "Pull the right thread, and the whole pattern emerges." Her nephew Raymond West had lingered in St. Elms, his writer's curiosity, insatiable. He arrived at the cottage, his face alight with the latest village gossip. "Aunt Jane, the pub's buzzing," he said, tossing his coat over a chair. "They're saying Black had a daughter, someone he abandoned after the London scandal. Could she be Clara?" Miss Marple's eyebrows rose, her mind seizing the new piece. A daughter? That's a thread worth following. But Clara was Eliza's middle name, tied to her affair. We must be cautious. Names can mislead. Determined to bring the mystery to its climax, Miss Marple had arranged another gathering at the vicarage, ostensibly to discuss parish matters, but truly to confront the suspects with her deductions. She sent notes to Reverend Thomas, Eliza, Mr. Lang, Dr. Thorne, and Inspector Graves, inviting them for an early evening tea. "A final unraveling," she told Raymond, pinning her hat with care. "The storm has gathered, now it breaks." By 6 o'clock, the vicarage drawing-room was a tableau of strained civility. The tea service gleamed, sandwiches and scones arranged with precision, but the air crackled with anticipation. Thomas sat rigidly, his clerical collar a stark contrast to his pallor. Eliza clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Lang, his youthful face tense, stood by the window. Thorne, her sharp features set in defiance, sipped tea with deliberate calm, and Graves, notebook in hand, eyed the group like a hawk. Miss Marple, seated near the fireplace with her knitting basket, began with her usual deceptive mildness. "We've danced around the truth long enough," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence. "Mr. Black's death was no suicide, but a murder, carefully staged to mislead." Graves leaned forward, his mustache twitching. "Murder's certain, Miss Marple, but the who and why. We've got blackmail, grudges, affairs, motives galore," Thomas interjected, his voice hoarse. "Black was a liar, trying to ruin me with false accusations. That letter, claiming I planned the theft, it's nonsense." Eliza nodded, her voice trembling. "He threatened our lives, our reputation." "But we didn't kill him," Thorne scoffed. "Reputation? Your hypocrisy, you mean. My brother suffered because of you, Reverend, and that glove, planted to frame me." Lang added, "and the wrapper in my room. Someone's orchestrating this, Inspector, to keep us fighting." Miss Marple raised a hand, her tone calm but commanding. "Let's unravel this web." The facts. Black arrived, posing as Croft, with blackmail threats tied to a London scandal. He died by cyanide, a vial from Dr. Thorne's surgery in his hand. A note, "The truth must out," suggested intent, but whose? Footprints in the garden, too shallow for a man, hinted at disguise. The glove, the wrapper, red herrings, placed to confuse. And a letter, accusing Thomas, but possibly a diversion. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. The killer is not among the obvious suspects. The murderer is. Lily, the housemaid. The room erupted in gasps. Eliza cried, "Lily? That's impossible," Thomas stammered. "Our maid?" Preposterous. Lang stared, dumbstruck, while Thorne's eyes narrowed. Graves, skeptical, demanded, "Proof, Miss Marple." "That's a bold claim." Lily, who had entered silently with a fresh pot of tea, froze, her face paling. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "Lily is Elias Black's daughter, abandoned after the London scandal when Thomas's testimony led to her family's ruin. She infiltrated the vicarage months ago, seeking revenge. The midnight visitor was a ruse. She lured her father here, knowing his past with the Hales. She stole the cyanide from Dr. Thorne's surgery, poisoned him in the garden, and planted the glove and wrapper to implicate others. The footprints. She wore oversized boots to mimic a man's tread, but her slight frame left them shallow. The hat in the study? It hid a wig. She disguised herself to mimic Black's voice from the garden, creating the illusion he was alive after his visit. Lily's teapot clattered to the floor, her eyes blazing. "You meddling old bat. Father deserved it. He deserted us, left Mother to die in shame. And the Hales, hypocrites, preaching virtue while ruining lives." She lunged toward the door, but Graves seized her, his face grim. "Stay put, miss." "Let's hear the rest." Miss Marple's voice softened, but her gaze was unyielding. "The shocking truth, Black didn't come to blackmail, but to reconcile. He'd reformed, wanted to make amends for abandoning you, Lily. But you, consumed by vengeance, saw only betrayal. You forged the letter accusing Thomas, staged the blackmail to expose their secrets as collateral damage. Eliza's affair, Thorne's grudge, Lang's accounts, all distractions you fueled." Eliza sobbed, clinging to Thomas. "Reconcile? Then why threaten us?" Miss Marple sighed. He didn't. Lily twisted his intentions, used his past to justify her crime. The note, the truth must out, was her flourish, a taunt to the Hales. Graves, cuffing Lily, turned to Miss Marple. "How'd you know?" She smiled faintly. "Small things, Inspector." Lily's access to the house, her knowledge of the garden, her furtive glances. "In St. Mary Mead, I saw a maid once plant evidence to settle a score. Human nature repeats itself." Lily's hatred was personal, hidden behind loyalty. Lily sneered, unrepentant. "I'd do it again. They all deserved it." As Graves led her away, the room fell silent, the weight of revelation settling like dust. Thomas embraced Eliza, their faces etched with relief and guilt. Thorne, shaken, muttered, "I misjudged you, Miss Marple." Lang, silent, stared at the floor, his role in the accounts unresolved, but secondary now. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her work done. Human nature, betrayal often comes from those closest, disguised as loyalty. She bid farewell, stepping into the night. The village was quiet, the vicarage lights dimming as peace, fragile but restored, settled over St. Elms. At her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, her needles clicking softly. The storm had broken, the truth laid bare. "A daughter's vengeance," she mused, twisted by years of pain. The village slept, its secrets unraveled, but Miss Marple knew other threads waited, hidden in the quiet corners of human hearts.